choice.
Hi, welcome to the Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio and UCY TV. On today's show, we're going to meet a very special friend from a part of my life. You're going to learn more about your humble narrator, Liam. You're going to hear more about the mind control industry that is America and some of its seedier. Sorry, I just got lost in that bad metaphor. We're going to be strains, habits, whatever. We're going to be talking with Zack Bonnie. We'll bring that interview up in a second. Remember, support local independent journalism by buying a local book on localamazon.com called Local Official Stories. Remove the word local for better understanding. Official Stories always exist to protect officials. I'm working on Official Stories 2 as I speak, as you listen. Official Stories 2 will be different in format. It will cover a wide range of topics. It may be looser and more informal. It may be more personal. It may be more about my life, but it will also be about the big topics that we're afraid to take on, always the big fake sciences and the big fake religions. Zack Bonnie is an author and trained as an actor, studied Shakespeare, I believe, and did all kinds of other things in his life, but the thing we're going to talk about today is the experience that warped his young mind, called Rocky Mountain Academy, a.k.a. Cedu. Let's get to the interview with Zack Bonnie. I have on a guest this segment who went through an experience that I also went through. You're going to learn more about your not-so-humble host and his friend Zack Bonnie. Zack Bonnie has written a book called Dead, Insane, or in Jail. Dead, Insane, or in Jail is actually something that we were all told was going to happen to us if we didn't listen to the important people who were giving us lessons about, well, cuddling together, really. Also screaming at the floor and digging a lot of ditches and trenches just to fill them back up, because that's what childhood's supposed to be about. Zack Bonnie is the author of Dead, Insane, or in Jail. You can go to Dead, Insane, or in Jail, one word, deadinsane-or-in-jail.com, and find his book for purchase. The book of the same name. It is also there at Amazon.com. You can download it. You can I think you can even read it on Kindle these days. You can do that. You can leave a pleasant review, because what Zack has done is taken the experience that so many people went through and turned it into a graphic written novel. There's also some artwork done, and we'll talk about that. Zack Bonnie, thanks very much for being on the show.
Hi, Liam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being had. And that's that. That was the interview with Zack. Zack, tell us about it.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad I was had, because otherwise we wouldn't have had anything to talk about.
Zack, you were I was a young man of 16. How old were you when you got sent to, let's say what your novel's about. You were sent to a school, they call it a school for troubled teens.
Right, so the one that you went to was in California, and I guess simultaneously, at the same time, I was in Idaho at their sort of spin-off school called Rocky Mountain Academy. Liam, I think it's important that we talk about the fact that it's not like I was there by myself. I was there with hundreds of other kids, and so were you. And that's one of the things that I try to get across right out of the gate, is that this isn't a singular experience. My experience that I wrote about in such detail is something that literally tens of thousands of people went through.
I made a little documentary called Surviving Cedu that you can find up there on the YouTube, on the Google video pages. I made that really to pull a thorn out of my paw, because I was sent to this place. I didn't want to be sent to this place. I had no business being at that place. And I saw some things that you write about. What was it like? How old were you when you got into this place? And can you describe to the listening audience what it is like to be 15, 14, 13 and walk into an environment as strange as the one you describe in your book, Dead, Insane, or in Jail?
Well, I was 14 when I was sent there, and just a little bit of light reading on the history of Cedu shows that it stood for Charles E. Dederick University, and that in itself is important because it was a cult disguised as a boarding school, as you said, for, quote, troubled teens. But really it was, very adept at marketing to parents and able to cover up the heritage, if you will, of where its name came from, which actually is important, and maybe we can get into that.
Well, don't stand on ceremony. What was Charles? Who was Charles E. Dederick, and why did he have a university named after him?
Well, I mean, that's really tongue-in-cheek because it wasn't a university. It was a 70s experiment in utopian living, but it was working with drug addicts who were over 18. So Mel Wasserman, well, you tell the story a little bit in your book, and I'm not... One of the things that I'm kind of interested in doing is peering a little bit more into the history, but that is not the subject of my book or my memoir.
No, it's not, but I want the audience to be able to bite on it. So what happened was there was this... here's the mythos that we were given when we were at Cedu. Cedu stands... They told us that... What did they tell us it stood for, by the way?
Yeah, they said it stood for see yourself as you are and do something about it, which is such a bunch of horse crap and patooky because if, for example, my father is in the mental health field, and so he knew the work of Charles Dederick because Charles Dederick was known as a quack, because Charles Dederick was on the cover of Time magazine representing a cult, because it's just one of those things that they had to distance themselves from, and yet they chose to hold on to the name. And let's not forget that this was a time before the internet. Let's also not forget that this was a time before the cell phone too. So a lot of people are like, well, why couldn't you call somebody? Well, the only phone numbers I had memorized were people who lived 3,000 miles away. They couldn't actually help me in the immediate sense.
Right. Well, the story is that there was a guy called Mel Wasserman is the nice story they gave us. And Mel Wasserman was a furniture salesman down in, I don't know, the valley, I don't remember. And he would watch these 20-somethings, and even some 30-somethings, and some teens, some runaways, all on heroin. The story we had was there was a guy on roller skates, with a purple cape, and these were the far-out lost generation of the 60s. And Mel came in, and then they said that he saw the play Pippin, and in the play Pippin there's a guy who says, who are you and what are you doing with your life? Or, and they look at the audience and they say, who are you going to be? Or something supposedly empowering and full of crap like that. And he decided to just, for no reason that anybody can understand, bring in these heroin addicts to his home and begin to have raps. So they began to rap. That is to talk openly about their problems. And they had rules for raps, like you can say anything you want to anybody, but you can't do physical violence. But of course, you can do as much psychological and emotional violence as you want to. And what you say in a rap stays in a rap. Of course, it doesn't. And then you're supposed to get into your feelings. What they didn't tell us was that Mel Wasserman was a student of Est, of Bernhardt, and of Charles Dederick. And that he was a Synonite, that these guys were hanging around with this Synanon crowd. Well, Synanon started down in Venice Beach, near Santa Monica, and Charles Dederick was a failed alcoholic who decided not to stick with AA, but to develop his own thing. So you can read their books, The Light on Synanon, the Tunnel Back. There are a number of books on Synanon where you can read about their processes, and their processes were to keep people up late at night, to do sleep deprivation, to keep people living in an isolated sort of central community. The Synanon cult got involved with everything that cults get involved with, which is forced partner swapping and all of the rest of the kind of good time bullshit that you'd expect out of a 60s, 70s cult. It was eventually labeled a cult and broken up by the Supreme Court after an attorney investigator really went after them, Paul Moran, and was had rattlesnakes put into his mailbox and was bitten and nearly killed. by them for investigating Synanon. Well, Synanon went underground. Mel Wasserman spun off a thing, and he started a Charles E. Dedrick University. We were told it was the Cedu School, and we were supposed to see ourselves as we are and do something with or about it. They never really were sure which preposition to use. Now that brings us up to speed. And it was 1988 when I got sent there because I told my mother that I remembered being abused as a child and I was depressed and I wanted to talk to a therapist. So before I knew it, I was like bundled off. I mean, I had not lit anything on fire. I was just a little bit depressed. And before I knew it, I was on a plane to California because my mother has no ability to deal with actual problems. So that's what happened to me. Now, how did you get to Rocky Mountain Academy, which was the spin-off?
Wait, I want to go back to something you just said. So you got put on an airplane? Were you alone at
no.
15?
No, I was 16. And I was there with a scumbag named Lloyd Paradiso, true scumbag. They call them educational consultants. But these guys, he was friends with Tim Brace, and they, got money kicked back for, it was like that bit of Pinocchio, remember, where Honest John the Fox sells kids to... I don't remember who it was who runs that Pleasure Island.
Oh, yeah.
It's exactly. Yeah, that's what Lloyd Paradiso was. He was like the guy, hey, I'm Honest John the Fox. He even looked like, he had sort of he had a mustache, and he would have had like a pocket watch with a chain if it had been like 50 years earlier. He would have walked around with a pocket watch and a chain like, hello, boys.
Well, one of the things that I'm interested in looking at, and again, this is not what's in my book, but it should be said that this is why I wrote the Dead and Sane Are in Jail series, was so that I could encapsulate by my own experience, that I can say firsthand, this is exactly what happened and the way it happened. And you've just brought up one of the really interesting, important points, which is whether you went to a Cedu school or to WASPs, that's the Worldwide Association of Specialty Boarding School kind of things, or to any one of these kind of, quote, behavior modification schools or something involving the troubled teen industry. A lot of what the first step has to do with is the suddenness in which a kid is left in the new situation. And that suddenness is done in a very specific way. It's either like, you kind of had it in a way different than a lot of kids, but they're all kind of falling into the same category where it happened suddenly. And in my case, what happened was my dad said we were going skiing. Mind you, this is July, but, I was 14 and I thought in Idaho, I'm from Virginia, so I'd never been out west. And so they said Idaho, and I was like, great, we're going skiing. So while I was on my tour, my dad drove off and left me there. It was within about maybe 20 seconds of having that news told to me that I was strip searched and my hair cut off, and I was basically interred very suddenly into a situation that I was not expecting, and that turned out to be, well, that's what we're going to talk about.
So what was our RMA, Rocky Mountain Academy? What was it like, and what's the story that you tell in your book?
Well, the story I tell in my book is of the first 24-hour marathon workshop that they called Prophets, and that stood for putting feet under the words of the prophet, another play on words in a silly little way. And their prophet in this case was literally the book The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. So during these nights that we would have every 3 or 4 months, as you remember, they would spend a lot of time standing us up on our feet or doing various exercises and keeping us awake and having us go very deeply into our feelings. I don't want to get too into that because there is so much mysticism, spiritual assault that goes on during those workshops that I feel like just to make light of it and touch on it lightly doesn't do it justice. And in fact, the first prophet that we experienced in the Cedu education is what I have detailed in my book, which I think is why it's having a little bit of buzz among social scientists and psychologists and the like.
Well, don't be too mysterious. I mean, what was a prophet?
It's hard to describe. Kind of like a rap. A rap would be like a 3 or 4 hour experience where 12 kids or 15 or 20 kids, all of various ages and at various stages in the program, would go through this thing 3 times a week for 4 hours. And then the kids that you got there with, all in your, quote, peer group, the people that got there at the same time as you, would move through the program together in this linear manner. And so what we say move through the program, what we really mean is get through these different 9 24-hour workshops that they called Profits. And in order to describe them, I had to go through quite a bit of detail in order to make use. And what I wanted to do was catalog exactly the sequence of events and the overarching systems of my brain it seemed to play on, because when you're immersed in an activity like a profit or a rap, you can't leave the room. And because you can't leave the room, there's no other, and because you can't leave the room and there's no distraction, and you're told that what's happening there is the reason that you're in that room, and that's the most important thing in the world, it does turn out to be important, because I'm having such a hard time describing it to people without using a lot of jargon that they don't know. And that's one of the singular experiences that kids have, kind of like the suddenness of being injected into a place like this. There's also a little bit of difficult time recreating and encapsulating in words what your particular experience was. I just want to say that here, because not every troubled teen place engages in the kind of psychological trauma or psychological picking, experimenting, dinkering, confusing conjecture, and forced introspection that we went through in these Profits and raps at Cedu. Although they might go through something kind of variation. Everything, these places all seem to operate on a spectrum where they'll have a lot of the wilderness thing and a little bit of the sociological confrontation in front of the whole group, public shaming part, or they'll have a whole lot of the public shaming part and you have to earn the right to use a toothbrush or toilet paper or something like that. And they really push the linear, like, this is how you change yourself. But then they don't experiment with why you got sent there. And so, I think in some ways, one of the things that the Cedu program did, and not to mention longevity, we're there for 30 months, 2.5 years. That's a very long time. And that's another thing. A lot of kids get sent away for shorter amounts of time, and it also has an impact on them.
A rap was a thing where, like you said, they put us in a room for 4 hours, 15, sometimes 11, sometimes 19 of our peers, and we had to scream at each other. And there were rules to how you could scream at each other. You had to cross the room so you could scream at the other person, and then everybody got screamed at eventually, and then you had to scream at the floor and say, like, fuck you, mom or dad, for whatever it was they wanted you to say, and then you cried, and you got in touch with some, tributary or some vein of feelings in yourself that was quite real, and you would just bawl. I mean, B-A-W-L, you would just cry to a degree you'd never cried before, and it did feel better. It was a huge catharsis. And then you were in good graces unless you had held somebody's hand that you weren't supposed to hold, or were accused of saying Led Zeppelin, which you weren't allowed to say because you weren't allowed to talk about music. And then you had to wash dishes all night even though you cried. But so a Profit was a 24-hour version of this, and they would make us do the dumbest shit. And, we would look at each other. We were kids. Like, a lot of time we knew this is dumb. And then you just have to go with it. The thing about Cedu is, the Cedu experience, or an immersive experience like that, is it tells you how easily programmed to go along and get along people are. So I suspect that most people who've been through a Cedu experience look at almost anything in the world and they go, cult, religion. Oh, I see. You want me to believe stuff that is absolutely clearly not true and go into a room and be sad about somebody I never met getting nailed to a cross? Fuck you. Fuck you. You want me to get into the tax form line to do this because you want me to fund a war? Okay, here's your money for the tax form, but I don't believe you, So,
well, I don't know I just want to clarify that I think you can go through this and still be spiritual or religious. However, I will agree that I don't know whether it's something that there's a gap in my programming somewhere, but I have a very low tolerance for advertising or somebody trying to sell me something. It becomes really apparent very quickly if somebody's trying to pick up money for a bus ticket and they need to talk to me. Like, I can kind of discern in 5 minutes whether that person really just wants to go buy a bag or a bottle of something, or if they really need a train ticket. And then, by the same token, I think because we've gone through this experience a lot of the time, we've been trained, if you will, to be a receptacle to people who need to talk, because we want to be open to all of segments of society. And do you remember some of the experiences from the Summit workshop that your interviewees in your documentary so adeptly spoke about? I thought it was great when you included that, especially that fellow having to the police come for soliciting, because we had to take $1 and give $1. And the thing is, and this is what, this is 30 months after being left there, have hardly ever handled money. We've never had any money. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to go out there and get $1 from somebody we've never talked to before. And then the whole spiritual, mystical side of this is, and then afterwards, make sure you give that $1 to somebody. See if you can get somebody to buy you breakfast, because that's one of the agreements. Go out there and have somebody buy you lunch. And then you have this secret weapon where you're going to buy them lunch too. And you had a guy included on there who had the police come, and he was like, no, you don't understand. I have to do this. And the police are like, no, you don't understand. You need to get the fuck out of the mall.
Right.
That was so funny.
They didn't have us do money exchange. We had to get people's phone numbers. I mean, if you can imagine sending...
Oh, you had to do all that. All of that.
So yeah. The Summit is an experience where they hold you in, I think it's a week. So instead of a single overnight, you get to go to bed, but you're excluded from everybody else for a week, and you run around doing all of this totally ridiculous stuff. And finally at the end, because you have barely been released into the wild for these 30 months, at somewhere at about 27, 28, 29 months, you're suddenly down the hill, because this was up in Running Springs, where running away would put you in peril of death. In an era without cell phones, without great concern about runaways. This was before a lot of stuff. This started in the 70s and always felt like the 70s. So people could really bully you, and you didn't have terms like "you're bullying me," "what you're doing is abuse." There was no real sense of that,
No. In fact, quite the opposite. Your parents, we were told, you lost the privilege to live at home, and we're restoring you to normalcy so you can be back out in the world. That's how bad you are.
That's right. And that's where you get the title.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, the dead and sane are in jail. I think you really kind of, I don't remember whether it was on this conversation or, just an hour before, but dead and sane are in jail was exactly what we were threatened would happen to us when we ran away, because there was a term for that too, which was splitting. And 70% of kids while I was there split. It wasn't. And again, I wanted to write about my splitting experience because everybody had a sudden getting there experience, and everybody had a sudden getting the fuck out of there experience. So, I wanted to include that.
We'll return in the second half of the show with the second half of that interview. Dead, Insane, or in Jail, a Cedu Memoir, is available online at deadinsaneorinjail.com. You can buy it there. You can also buy it on Amazonia.com, Amazon.com. Putting mom and pop bookstores out of business since 2000-something. Thinking about America is a kind of a cult, right? I mean, what's the difference between a cult and a culture? You'd say, well, we're not a cult, we're a culture. No, we're a cult. We have our cultic beliefs. We believe that a man was murdered on 2 pieces of wood and bled, and somehow that's supposed to be good for the rest of us. We believe that we're supposed to lie to children around the winter solstice for reasons that no one can really explain, but it's important that we do, because if we don't, we're spoil sports and we're spoiling the fun. We believe that putting fluoride in water is good for teeth, even though fluoride causes fluorosis. We believe that we're all equal, except that gay people can't get married. We believe that sex is okay, except that some people have sex diseases that they don't know they have, so they have to go get tested by very important people. And trust them, I guess, that the test results are accurate, and then take drugs that kill them, but that's okay because those were the gay people anyway, and we already talked about them. That's who we think we should test. We're a cult. I mean, we say that we're a culture, but what do we mean? And people say, well, defending the American culture. What is the American culture? Is it NASCAR? Is it shopping? Is it Amazon.com? Is it Walmart? That's not culture, that's just commerce. Well, that is American culture. American culture is commerce because commerce makes us free. Well, you can sell your kid to a school. I mean, you can just, if you have enough money, you can just put your kid in a school. You don't have to be a parent. Oh, but being a parent, that's very important. Well, tribes do it very differently than we do. They do tribal parenting. They don't just expect one person to go earn all the money, or two people to go earn all this money to shower on the kids so that the kids can be essentially raised by government schools or private schools or something like that, and then give them an HPV shot because nobody talks to them about sex, and you think that at least if you inject them with something that will protect them, even though the shot says that it doesn't. We have a cult. Is it a cult or a culture? We have a culture of protecting doctors, not children. What's the difference between a cult and a culture? It's a question you should be asking yourself. As the oil state winds down, people are going to threaten you with Jesus land. They're going to say, well, things are bad because we didn't believe enough in Jesus. You know what I have to say to that? I have to say, this is the Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio and UCY TV. Stay tuned to all the great programming right now. I mean, stay here. That's what I'm trying to say. I didn't say it well, but I'm saying it. And it's time for a special UCY TV middle of the record run-out groove. Yes, we're flipping the record here on the radio. We're going to put on the second half of the LP, the long-playing record. We're interviewing Zack Bonnie, we being me and the mouse in my pocket, about Dead and Sane are in Jail, a Cedu Memoir. But it's time to advertise a little for myself. I'm an independent author. I'm independent because I was libeled on the front page of the New York Times for trying to point out that if you murder little brown-skinned Dominican children in New York, nobody cares. I thought that they might care because it was the New York Times, after all. Joke was on me. That really ended my ability to write for the big important magazines like Harper's and Vanity Fair. I mean, of course, they don't want to publish anything by somebody who says it's not okay to, murder kids in New York if they're Dominican. You're supposed to think it's okay as long as you're doing experiments with them that make pharmaceutical companies money. I mean, that's the takeaway. And that is in Chapter 6 of my book, Official Stories, the whole bloody thing. But you know what? I might just tell that story again from a more personal point of view in Official Stories 2. You know why? Because you can never have enough truth. It's Truth Sandwich here on UCY TV on the Liam Scheff Show. Official Stories is available on Amazon.com right there with Dead and Sane are in Jail by Zack Bonnie. Yes, we're, I guess, brothers under the skin. I guess we went through a similar experience and, came out ourselves in some fashion. Zack seems very fascinated by the entire mind control industry, and we will talk more about that in the second half of the interview. In the meantime, go read Official Stories on Kindle. It's there for a song. I think it's $3 or $4. You can read it. You can read a lot of it for free and see how it goes. Remember, the first half of the book, or the first third of the book, is on the government conspiracies. Then we go into school, more with English, Shakespeare, and then we spend a little while in the fake sciences, Big Bang, first there was nothing which exploded, plate tectonics, the Earth is expanding and contracting at exactly the same rate of speed, not likely, and Darwinism, which says that because the church was wrong, nothing has any meaning. This is essentially where intellectualism in the 20th century, 21st century lives. It's in a just barely post-medieval sort of acid reflux. It's just puking back on some of the medieval church stuff. But the church doctrine is, it's enough to defy church doctrine to be considered an intellectual in this country. It's hardly interesting. So we have to suffer Richard Dawkins and Chris Hitchens and all these guys who had nothing good to say about church. Good, I get it, I understand. But they didn't question the sciences, which makes Official Stories a rare and unique book there on the Amazon bookshelf. Please order some copies. You can go to CreateSpace. You can write me if you want to order in bulk and get a discount. That's Official Stories by Liam Scheff. Let's get back to the interview with Zack Bonnie. You're listening to the Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio and UCY TV, talking to Zack Bonnie, author of Dead, Insane, or in Jail, a Cedu, See Yourself as You Are, memoir, Charles E. Dederick. I always enjoy when people come upon that and they say, no, it couldn't possibly mean Charles E. Dederick. Like, what else do you think CEDU means? You really think they shorten See Yourself as You Are? Why would
and have you noticed the logo that they use for like Google Share or whatever? It's like it's three little people kind of holding each other in a group hug, and that was the symbol for Cedu. Do you remember that?
Well, let's talk about some of the group hugging. We were going to talk about splitting, but I think let's first talk about the long group hugs that we all had to participate in, even though we didn't really want to most of the time. Sometimes with some of our friends or the girls or whoever you had crushes on, I suppose it was a group hug could be a long sustained group hug could be okay. But what was it called? What did they call it there at RMA?
Smushing. You're talking about. Did you guys have smushing at Cedu? Because we sure had it at RMA.
I remember I'm a 16-year-old kid. I have PTSD from the abuse of my stepmother. She's just this insane, anorexic, bulimic, tortured soul, this insane woman. My absentee father and my totally neurotic, fucked up mother. And I get to this place and I'm walking around and I'm used to like somewhat city life. I'm used to biking all around and we're stuck in this giant cabin on this mountaintop. And all these kids kids from 14 to 19 start getting these giant corduroy pillows and throwing them down, like giant corduroy pillows, and throwing them down on this carpet, and then they lean, and then one of them opens their legs, and oh my God. What happened the first time some guy opens his legs and then pats the ground in front of him? Come sit.
Yeah. Okay. Smushing is, again, this is one of those things that I have my own personal experience, and then I have the way that I think that their system meant for it to be. And it does also deserve at least a few lines here to say that your experience changes when you're in a place for 2.5 years. So, I was a big smusher. I love to touch people. I like to be touched. I like to feel loved. And that's what the whole program was about. And, so the first several months when you're like, whoa, this is creepy. These people are strange. They all want to touch each other. This is not normal. It just goes to show you how something becomes normal. I have been writing in the first book, Dead, Insane, or in Jail, a Cedu Memoir, a lot about my first impressions. But where we're going with this is how how you deal with those situations changes when you're in the situation. So something that is not normal becomes normal pretty quickly.
Well, let's be specific. Before you talk about the overarching sort of analysis of it, we're talking about laying on the floor, and you lay on a cushion, just the rudimentary bits and pieces. You lay on the floor, and you all have clothes on. No sex was allowed, by the way. Which is the hysterical joke. I mean, no sex is allowed. No genital contact with hands or mouths or even or eyes. No kissing.
Oh, not even thinking about it. Come on.
Well, you could go wank. Come on, the boys' dorms were wankathons. I mean, we were just constantly having to masturbate. There was nothing we could do. I know. Yeah. I remember every guy had a T-shirt that he. Sacrifice to the goddess of late night love, self-love, right? These crusty bleached, they're like tie-dyes after a while.
Oh man, you're disgusting, Liam. But yeah, we were young, and
What's
and it
disgusting about
was
that? It's pure
no, no,
biology.
no, no.
No, it was disgusting. They would draw us down on the floor, and it wasn't just the kids, and we'd have to lay on each other's stomachs, and we'd have to lay on each other's thighs. And
Yeah.
after a while, you just sort of look forward to having a friend tousle your hair and laying on their thigh. But the problem was you had to smush with people that you did not like. You
Right,
didn't
that's
even
true.
like them at all.
Right, right,
Oh,
right. And actually, and even that in itself is one of the things that they quote touched on. That they played on these feelings that are natural, that you would kind of be repelled by a person who had just screamed at you in a rap, or you'd be repelled by somebody who said something really mean to you, and that they had taken the time to say that was supposed to be, something that you translated into being that they cared for you. So, if you had feelings of repulsion because you were smushing with a staff who had been what we now call abusive to you verbally in a rap, we were kind of led to believe that there was something wrong with us. There was something wrong with our programming. There was something wrong with our heart.
wow. I don't remember
Yeah.
them ever going that far with us. Like, if we didn't want to smush with somebody, we would try to just, squeak out of it. I don't know. So smushing, their arms would be around you and you'd have to talk. But it was gross. And the Stockholm Syndrome was in full effect. And we
And
had,
that, yeah, that's what I was trying to touch on there was, and a lot of people who maybe went there, they really, the school and the system that we lived in went a long way to changing the attachment model on how humans interact. So it's quite complicated, the reactions people have when they try to intellectually, quote, remember, end quote, because it happened, and then where you place different parts of what it is that happened over those 2 or 3 years into what part of your body or brain or how you were kind of comprised to make up that huge amount of information. And that's one of the things I think it's important about writing about it and having documentaries about it, is seeing and hearing and feeling these different perspectives about what somebody felt on a given Wednesday in 1988 or whether it was a Friday in 2002, because people are still going through similar experiences like that, where they're completely totalitarianized and put into a situation where there's only one way to be, and this is the way to be, and nothing else in the world are you exposed to except these new role models. And these new role models are much like the military. When you're taken out of a situation at 16 or 19, and they know that this is how they're playing on parts of our brains. It's not just one part. It's not like, oh, I'm going to learn like in college, or I'm going to eat like at a restaurant. It's going to be how you live, how you think, how you feel. And we can change that over time to be the new role model. In our cases, it was these adults who really didn't have any psychological training, thinking that they were saving the world, thinking that they were saving us, thinking that they were better than our parents, thinking that they had more to offer than any other teacher in the world. And then when and I think one of the big problems with the system of Cedu and Rocky Mountain Academy that we went through at that time was that they really, like I said at the beginning, tinkered with these very important parts of what it is to be human and what it is to be attached to other people, to father figures, to mother figures, and eventually to sexual partners. And so they kind of screwed with all of those systems for a long period of time. And then afterwards, there really wasn't any follow-up. And even from a person who loved it there and thinks we're just complaining and they don't know why we're complaining, even from one of their points of view, that's the seed that I want to leave there, which is they opened us up, left us scathed, left us kind of half bleeding, and then shoved us out there in the world and told us that was enlightenment.
Yeah. Well, they got their paycheck. By the way, I think it was the total bill. Like, I didn't grow up with money, and my mother worked her way up and up and up and up the medical establishment. I was not born with money. We did not have money. My father left. He did not pay child support, so it was sort of rough. And my mother went back to medical school because her family, she comes from doctors. You'd think that they would have had money. I suppose they had a little, but it wasn't, I don't know, it wasn't like today. They were researchers, and they just weren't making huge money, and they lived, I wouldn't say quite simply, but you'd be surprised. It was fairly rustic without being farmers or anything like that. But when I got to be a teenager, my mother, well, by the time I was 15, my mother was making a pretty decent paycheck being a pointless doctor playing with radioactive material. I got that money spent on Cedu, which cost $100-something thousand a year, and that was like my college money. That was money that I never would get again. It was thousands of dollars a month, right? And this is the 80s. This is 80s money. I don't know what it would be today. It would probably be $500,000 today.
Oh gosh, I don't know, but it sure was expensive, and I know. My father is a professor, and so we never grew up in need in any way. But I know that it was expensive enough. It was expensive enough that it was having enough of an impact that they looked for other options. And I'm pretty sure that one of the things that happened for the Cedu system was that they got bought by different corporations that would allow them to take insurance monies. And that's one of the things that occurred. That's right. And that, and that's another thing to look at here when we're not just talking about Cedu, but we're looking at this entire genre, this entire subsector of American culture, is that there could be, again, like, whether it's an airline or a computer, just a huge corporation behind something. So there's no individual responsibility. And then they can say, oh, but the therapist that you had, we didn't know that they weren't licensed. We didn't know that they were causing harm. So they can say, from the other side. And so from a corporate perspective, the companies that own these places, they might have, thousands of kids going to 100 different schools. If they then can say at one of their 100 schools, if a kid's parents sue them because something horrible happened, or there's sexual abuse, or a kid died, or, then they can say, oh, it's this individual counselor who is responsible for that kid, and not look at any of the systematic and corporate kind of shirking of responsibility here. And that's one of the systematic things I want to kind of get out there and keep on the radar, is that, we're looking at this as like, wait a minute, how many dead kids are there? Instead of how many fraudulent programs, how many millions of dollars are sucked up through fraudulent practices and lying to parents and lying to kids. And then, and a lot of the time, and this is just another thing that I've noticed through being around and talking to people for the last 10 years about this, is that it takes about 10 or 15 years for somebody to shake their head off and say, you know what, I'm ready to analyze that experience now. It takes a long time to be able to produce something artistic of value that is, I was trying to, like you said, when I first heard you speak about Cedu, is that right when you got out of there, you were trying to wrap your head around what the hell was that pause in my life? Like, all of this, what was it? It messed with me on how I touch people, how I think about girls, how I think about food, how I think about emotions, how I think that peers are supposed to be, what I think friendship is. It talks to you on all of these levels. It takes some time to piece apart all of the ways that it affects you or
Absolutely.
me as an individual.
Oh, my God. So I got out of there, and I had a summer. I got a summer job immediately, doing some art thing at some T-shirt shop. So that was fine. And they give you a tape to listen to, and I listened to it only once or twice because it was awful, of all the music. I met some kids. I went out a couple times. I was in a kind of PTSD, elevated, weird state. I went to a college for one semester, and it was just stupid, dumbass kids spending their parents' money to screw and puke in the dorms. And I don't even begin to. I felt so alienated from my generation at that point. I didn't know who they were or what was wrong with them. Music had begun to change and shift toward not quite. It was going to shift toward grunge, which I never found appealing. I just found it to be morbid and stupefying. Sorry, it's a Harry Potter thing. I just do that. Then I cracked, and it was about 8 months in, and it was the middle of winter, and I was, of course, entirely alone there in the house with the person who made me pretty crazy, my mother, desperate to get out. In a way, you miss that 100 people that you're surrounded with. However difficult it is, you miss 100 people being around. That's so tribal. And then you're in this suburb. I'm in this damn suburb with old people next door and a couple of kids, and I didn't even have a car, and I didn't want to be there, and I cracked, and I really went crazy, and I thought I had to give away, just for like 2 days, I thought I had to give away all of my possessions and walk out into the world and be like that movie that they showed us, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, where St. Francis gives away all his crap and goes into the world and tries to be helpful. I swear to God, I thought that. And then my mother said, I don't know if that's a good idea.
Yeah, you know what? You're going to laugh, but I didn't talk to too many people from RMA afterwards for a while, but I did try to do all of the trust counseling and show that and instruct other people so that they could trust counsel and listen to the music and stuff like that. And that was weird. That was weird.
Right.
And people's reaction was kind of like the first time somebody spreads their legs of the same sex to you and pats in front of you like, hey, come sit between my legs.
Oh, I forgot.
It's kind of like that feeling.
I forgot. Trust counseling, you're supposed to scream in a room and scream at the floor.
Oh, yeah. Everything. Pounding pillows and all of the stuff that they taught us about being present and being there. We were kind of licensed through Cedu, if you remember, at the end. That's what the whole 6 months at the end of the program was these workshops were kind of licensing us to go out and spread the Cedu gospel. At least that's what I take from it.
Yeah, and hilarity ensues. So I remember being at college and being upset and just the one semester screaming in my pillow, and some people came up. The counselor came up. The what do you call it? Who runs the kid?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The older student who's in the dorm, and said, "Are you okay?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I heard you screaming in your pillow." I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know you heard that. I was just I was venting some feelings." I was sharing my feelings with the pillow.
And why didn't you didn't put two chairs together, knee to knee, and show them how to do diets and stuff like that?
No. I never had a desire to no, but it did affect my first serious relationship. But okay, so we make fun of it, but there's also this other thing. I'm not afraid of sharing my feelings. I'm, of course, respectful about it, but I'm not afraid of sharing my feelings, and I'm not afraid of having feelings. But I think that that's just a human thing. And we are tribal, and we do like affection, but we don't like forced affection, for Christ's sake. So it's like they took a couple of things that they knew through human experience, through basic human experience, worked with basic human biology and basic human social dynamics, and they said, okay, here's our way in. Without understanding that they were poking on the oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphin, norepinephrine switches, they poked them. Like, this gets a response, let's do that again. This gets a response, let's do that again. And a lot of this comes out of Chinese, Korean concentration, what it was called, communist concentration camps, essentially. A lot of the same tactics are used. Spy on each other,
that's right. The re-education programs do kind of stem. What we're learning more and more about this now that's really important, whether it's epigenetic shifts or whether it's neurobiology or neuropsychology or applied behavioral science, it falls into an enormous amount of categories. And that's one of the reasons that I keep talking about, taking a step back from my personal experience and looking at it from a systematic point of view. And I'm really interested and floored by the science that's going in to corroborate some of the things that I'm trying to get across from a literal or artistic point of view.
Well, because, I hear you, and that's hard to do. And like you were saying, I think eloquently, it takes a certain amount of time. So I got out, I cracked within about 7 or 8 months and just had this 2-day sort of breakdown. And afterward, I just didn't really know if I believed anything that they had told me quite the same way. Spring came around and I was taking a walk. I think not being around Cedu people and not being I was so far away from all of them because I was thrown back all the way to the East Coast, and it was, winter, and I had to be alone and think, and you go crazy or you come to terms with yourself. And I didn't have any other people to tell me to, live your truth or, do what you do, not what you say, whatever it was. I didn't have any of that stuff reinforced, so it fell away. And one day I was walking down a country road looking at some pastures where some horses were. And I swear to God, I tell this story, but I raised my hand involuntarily and I said, that was a cult. Like somebody had called on me and said, what's the answer to the question?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can totally get that. And I didn't talk to anybody for years. And I had to go back to high school.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that, a lot of the times kids who were there ahead of us, and I probably was this to kids who got there after me. But I remember thinking, oh my God, these kids have done so much stuff. I don't have any of that life experience. I shouldn't be here. They're drug addicts. Oh my God. And then later, I remember my little brothers being 15 and now I'm 16 or getting ready to, 17, maybe even going to be 18 soon and get out of there. And I'm telling them all this stuff that I kind of did, but really I have an embellished version of it now that basically excuses me for why I've stayed there and allowed myself to be preached at for years. So I have to have a version of myself which is equivalent to the amount of self-destruction and self-hatred that I was accused of in order to kind of justify the life lessons that I thought I was learning there.
You're listening to the Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio and UCY TV. We're on with author and fellow survivor Zack Bonnie, author of a Cedu Memoir, Dead, Insane, or in Jail. We got a couple minutes left. Where can people get your book, and what will they take away from the experience? And tell us a little about the art as well.
Oh, good. Thanks. Yeah. Well, the book can be purchased at Amazon. Just look it up. And also on my website, deadinsaneorinjail.com, where I'm selling the ebook and also the paperback. And actually, as you probably know from a self-publishing standpoint, just having the logistics set up to be able to do this and kind of compete with Amazon wasn't really a very easy thing. So I also have artwork from Jonathan Weiner, who is a fantastic artist living in San Francisco, who also went through the Cedu program. And it was really important for me to include a few pieces of drawing because my book takes place from my point of view when I was a younger kid, but I also have outsourced materials from either my parents, for example, or other documents like that the school provided at the time that I sort of incorporate in there, just to get kind of an over voice instead of just having this one person's voice. There's kind of during this story, you have a few different voices there. And in the second book, we carry that on. And that's really why I'm talking to you now, is that I'm doing an Indiegogo campaign through the month of March in 2016, where people are going to be able to pre-order the second book and also get some of this artwork that Jonathan Weiner produced on T-shirts. And I'm really excited about all of this. So
we've got a second book coming about. There's going to be a campaign to fund the second book. This is a continuing series, which is a very clever way to do it, by the way. So you don't have to write the great American novel all at once. Hard to do. People can't just squirrel away for 5 years into a cabin and produce a novel and have the world cheer. These days, people, if you don't stay on the radar, you sort of disappear. So you keep having to produce stuff. People actually want to participate in it. So it's very clever. I really like it. I felt like I pulled the thorn out of my paw, and I just wanted to get on with other things. But it does need to be talked about because it affects a lot of people. It's also funny. It's just so strange. And I focus so much on myths and sort of the cults of the modern world. Of course, I got to experience a number of cults growing up. The cult of science and medicine, the cult of my father's house and his way of thinking, the cult of my mother's medical family, and the cult. I went to Catholic school for 2 years and saw their craziness. I had Jewish friends and saw their particular belief systems. And then I was at Cedu, and that was, the biggest cult of all. Zack Bonnie, we can do this again. We can come back and revisit. There's always more there. It's an experience that really never stops giving from a literary standpoint. There are so many stories. There are so many stories. If you are a writer, and you want to take this on as a topic, you go interview Cedu people, because there's so many stories.
That is a great idea. Yeah, to all the writers out there who they never should be an excuse for a writer's block here. No. You can always talk to somebody who went to one of these programs and just say, tell me all about it.
Oh, my God.
Ask some questions.
Yeah. And we barely, we did skim the surface, but, the summit itself is just so absurd. The whole, go on.
No, the reason why I did this as a series was exactly what you just brought up. I've been writing about the last 6 months of the program for the last 20 years. And I really wanted to build it up correctly. And in order to build it up correctly, I needed readers right there experiencing the prophets and the raps and the changed relationships with me. And that's why the second book is called Overwritten, is, our personalities got overwritten. And so this process of overwriting is what I wanted to demonstrate, and that's the reason why some academics, and especially the people at the International Cultic Studies Association, are finally starting to pay a little bit of attention to the thought reform that we experienced.
Chilling note. Well, we managed to write ourselves back into the equation, but these stories are worth hearing, and we're telling Zack Bonnie's first memoir in the series is called Dead, Insane, or in Jail. Same website, Dead, Insane, or in Jail. It's getting good reviews. It's on Amazon.com. You can find it on Goodreads and other web pages. Zack Bonnie, thank you very much for being on the show.
Yes, thank you so much, Liam, and thanks a lot for helping me get the word out there about this important project.
Well, Liam, what did we learn on today's show? Well, we learned that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We learned that give adults a little power over a group of other people, including young adults and children or teens, and they'll do really weird things like making you hug people you do not want to hug. We learned that sending your kids away to have them raised by other people is very expensive, both in the emotional cost on the kids and to your wallet, so you might as well try to be halfway decent parents. If you're having that much trouble, why not sort of invoke a tribal idea? Yes, a tribal idea. That is where you get the people around you who are your friends, who you're related to, who are your adopted family, to participate in the raising of your kids so that we get out of this nuclear disaster we call America. We learned that you can buy Dead, Insane, or in Jail, Dead, Insane, or in Jail, Zack Bonnie's book, online at Amazon or at his website. I think that was a good lesson. Appreciate Zack for being on the show. He will be back to talk about the upcoming project and the sequel, or I should say the next in the series. We learned that you can buy Official Stories on Amazon.com, and that Official Stories is being written right now. It's going to be a reverse textbook to all the stuff I learned in life. If Official Stories was a reverse textbook to all the stuff I learned in school, then life has taught me many more lies than school possibly could, because life told me about religion, and life told me about the way relationships had to be. And of course those things weren't true either. They were as untrue as Big Bang mythology. It's not a theory, you can't test it. As HIV theory, which states that, gay men and black men somehow get sick from having sex 20 years later. These are powerful fictions that appeal to the myth-making part of our brains. Oh, well, that explains it, we say. Does it? Look at the details, scratch the surface. It's in Official Stories there on Amazon.com. Again, thanks to Zack Bonnie. Dead, Insane, or in Jail is his book and website. Next week we'll be back with some more relationship talk and some California oil problems, gas problems.